evening, everybody. My name is Reverend Annie Stebbins, and on behalf of Pat's children, Val, Cliff, and Pat's sister, Adele, and Pat's many grandchildren, welcome this evening, and thank you all for being here as we celebrate the life and work of Pat Rodegast. With Emmanuel by her side, Pat lived her life preparing us for this day. In the words of Emmanuel, you are here to visit, not to remain. This is not a curse. This is a gift from God. Today, as Pat and Emmanuel have instructed, we will salute the soul that has completed its task, touch glasses to time when we will meet again. So we come together tonight to honor our friend, teacher, mother, and grandmother, whose courage to speak the truth brought us Emmanuel's wisdom, which has been a triumph of love and light to a world so in need of these teachings. Pat wasn't sure who Emmanuel was, yet Emmanuel says of Pat, I am spirit and you are spirit. You and I are walking the same path. We are seeking truth, and our souls are yearning back towards the one God. Ram Dass said it beautifully. I see Emmanuel as a mirror and possibly an identity with not only Pat's higher consciousness or true self, but mine as well. Thus, I feel that I am speaking to another part of my own being that I still don't have easy access to because of the blinders of attachment. And isn't that precisely why so many of us over the years have gathered around Pat to hear Emmanuel's wisdom, to know our deepest truth? I don't know if we're able to get the prayer up on the screen or not. Yeah. Okay. Will you please all join me now as we share Pat's favorite St. Francis of Assisi prayer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and we'll do it really quickly. Cliff said whenever Pat was around anything electronic, this is what happens. Oh, that's welcome, Pat. So we'll wait for this to scroll through. And I'll say it. You can all hold this close to your hearts. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, unity. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is error, truth. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. Where there is darkness, light. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in the giving that we receive. It is in the pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in the dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. And few live by that prayer better than Pat's daughter, Val, who will now share her reflections. But before she does, Val, I just want you to know that you are the best of your mother. She was so blessed to have you by her side. You are always her greatest advocate, especially over these last few years as you fought fiercely to maintain dignity in her life. At the same time, overseeing the best possible care and surrounding your mother with constant love. This was your gift to your mother and a clear measure of your amazing grace. Here is Val.
Thank you, Annie, and I thank all of you for being here today to honor and celebrate my mother's life. Anyone who knew my mother personally knows that she had a strong penchant for three things: fast cars, a good glass of Chianti, and men. Definitely not in that order. I'd like to take this opportunity to clear my mom's reputation as a consummate flirt, but I can't. Can't count the flu, right? My mother's lifelong devotion was to eradicate the experience of fear in as many people as possible and replace it with the knowing that we are meant to be brilliant co-creators of life and that we are eternally safe. Like most of you, I've benefited greatly from her teachings, but there is no swifter teacher than life itself. There is 1 year of life with my mother that stands out as a time when watching her navigate her life was truly instructive in a way that has served me all of my life. I was 8 years old, and my mother's sister, brother, and I were essentially living in danger and had been for years. In a moment of courage, she spontaneously put us in the car and we hit the road, which was one of my mother's favorite things to do. We drove 1,500 miles straight through, and perhaps because we were embracing our freedom, we laughed ourselves silly the whole way. We laughed when we realized that Mom had driven up the exit ramp of the New Jersey Turnpike, way before the dementia. We laughed when we got utterly lost on the Beltway in D.C., and I remember looking out the window and seeing the Welcome to Virginia sign for the 3rd time and thinking, this is either the friendliest state in the nation or my mom's driving. We finally reached our destination and planted ourselves in a place where we didn't know anyone to make a life. Our first night there, a man, a stranger, attempted to break into our new home. I could see my mom get wobbly with fear. I imagined it made returning home tempting. Instead, the next day, my mother, the pacifist, went out and bought a gun. She went to a shooting range and she really learned how to use it, and we stayed put. I rarely saw my mom that year. She worked as a secretary by day and a waitress at night. We lived sparsely, but never went without. My mom always had one blue button in her change purse, like all of us. At the end of every week, if there was any money in her wallet, we got to go out to Morrison's cafeteria for dinner, which was great fun. 10 different colors of jelly. Afterward, she'd always look at her purse and say with nonchalance, well, we're down to the blue button. Here's what life with my mom that year taught me. Laughter will keep you alive. When you feel like the walls are closing in, do whatever you have to do to push them back. And when you're down to your last dime, spend it. I love you, Mom. And now I have the pleasure of introducing my brother to you. He has the most generous spirit of anyone I know. He lights up the room with his sense of humor and infectious laughter. And he has been my shining light my whole life. Cliff Piak. Thank you.
My mom never planned what she was going to say when she channeled Emmanuel, so a couple things I want to say. I got an email yesterday from a group that she had gone to quite a few times in Argentina, and they told me that they're holding a simultaneous prayer vigil. Through Facebook?
350 people had signed up as of yesterday, so there are 350 people.
350 people right now.
Right with us right now.
Right. So focus on them. Argentina, thank yous. My mom was quite a character, and I love the stories that Val told. You have a great memory. I forgot about that, the diner. Anyway, one of the things that I remember the most about her growing up, that was the most formative lessons I got from her, is when I was about 15, 16, and I believe that was the age, and she started the experience of channeling. And I know not everyone here necessarily knows this part of my mom's story. Basically, she had a friend that was murdered and then kind of appeared to her in a car, and my mom went and sought out what that was about. It didn't make sense to her. It was something. And she found a psychic in Greenwich named Marcy Seidel. And my mom and I with her started going to readings with Marcy. Not together, separately. I was just curious about this whole thing. And she was told that she had this ability to start channeling and tuning in, so she started honing in on that. And within a year or two, she started having a conversation with this light that she would see when she was meditating. And it turned out that the information coming through was extremely accurate and deep, and about information about people that she couldn't have known. And it started touching people's lives. And it was so amazing for me to watch her at that pivotal moment trusting something so whacked at the time. I mean, this was like 1972 or something. I mean, ESP was like being considered as some weird thing. So she was really taking some leaps of faith. And in addition to spending the last dollar, which I learned that one as well, she taught me to take chances and to trust. And I've approached my life like that constantly. Every time there's a moment that I can try something that's crazy or do something that's going to make me grow as a human, I always think of her, and I'd say, what would Mom do? And she would not even think twice. Go for it. So it's been an amazing lesson that's followed me through life, and she and I kind of didn't talk as much as we used to in the earlier years, because she started going out into the world and meeting all of you and channeling and touching literally hundreds of thousands of people's lives. And so she was out doing her job. And towards the end, when she came back home, and Val was so connected and helping her get settled and deal with this physical issue that was happening with her. Because when someone starts getting dementia and they're a channel, it's really hard to figure out what's going on. There was a couple of years there that we were just not getting it. And driving up the exit of the well, that's what before dementia, she was doing the same thing she'd always done. So we had no idea that this was happening for probably way too long, whereas anybody else, you would get it right away. But then she started coming to resolve with it, and she wanted to live life to the fullest, and she was almost to the point of where, from our perspective, it was restless. She wouldn't stay in one place. She was always going everywhere all the time. She couldn't help but drink up the whole thing. And when she got dementia and she started dealing with it, and she had to have a body that wasn't starting to move like it had, and her mind wasn't working like it had, the most amazing thing that she did was the way that she accepted it and got it to a place where she was completely at home with it and not like feeling sorry for herself, but she looked at this just the way she looked at everything else. Like, what is there to learn from this? How can I do this, the way I'm supposed to? And she did, and I'm so proud of her. I actually got a huge amount of respect for her that was even more than I had when I watched the way that she dealt with this last year and a half of her life. And I just think she was one of the most amazing women I've ever known. So I love you, Mom. That's all.
And Val, would you like to introduce the video?
Clip, are you going to show the thing? Yeah, clip it. Yeah, no, we got a minute. So this is what you're going to see is Carly Simon in 1989, which is, I guess, a few years after my mom's first book came out. I guess she got a hold of it, and she invited my mother out to Martha's Vineyard, where she resided for a few days to get to know her and have readings. And after she left, Carly Simon wrote this song. It's called Life is Eternal, and it was based on the teachings of Emmanuel. And she was kind enough to send us a copy of it before it was released, and very touching. So here it is.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about growing old and moving on. No one wants to be told that they're getting on and maybe going away for a long, long stay. But just how long and who knows, and how and where will my spirit go? Will it soar like jazz on a saxophone?
I would now like to introduce you to, and I hope she's here and not stuck in traffic, Barbara Azera. Is Barbara here? Oh, good. Hi, Barbara. Barbara is a longtime friend of Pat's from Pathwork. Barbara and Pat worked with one another over the years doing workshops, and today Barbara embraces and continues to teach the word of Emmanuel. So welcome, Barbara.
Beautiful. I got this. I like that song because I'm getting old. I have to take a moment. Richard, I have my feelings. I'm different because I'm looking at the children and the grandchildren of my dearest friend. Emmanuel was my teacher, but Pat was my friend. So what you said, Clifford, the whole thing with Emmanuel was to be present in the moment. So for 4 or 5 days, I obsessed of what I would say or what I would bring. I bring my love. And Emmanuel always used to say, and he said it in Italian, I can't, even though I'm married to an Italian, a gift of the Pathwork. But he used to say, what a party we would have if fear wasn't present. I look out into this audience and I see the love that has brought us together. I can look at everybody's face here and say, oh God, I remember you. I remember that time. I remember, Norman, when you made me bang with the grape doctor. I remember the bedtime stories, but I remember always, because of Pat, the love and her willingness to be present with who she was. And I remember the first workshop we did, we asked the people to write on a card what they really wanted to be known for. And your mom and your grandmother wrote, I want to be known for Pat, not Emmanuel. I want you to take a moment now just to go inside and feel what your friendship and your connection with Pat brought you. And then even realize who you're sitting next to is probably because of a connection with Pat. Feel the presence of her and her beautiful blue eyes and her laughter. And God, I didn't know that she was starting the dementia when we went up the down ramp in California. There's such a thin line. I wonder myself now. So what I started to do, because I really love the teachings and I've been trying to put it out into my community, into Brazil where I teach, into Serbia. And Emmanuel's teaching is very simple, love or fear. But I found something from Pat that she wrote years ago, and I want to read it to you because I think this is the essence of Pat Rodegast. Pat Pia, Rodegast, Bajanski, whatever. She was a flirt, Val. What if a miracle is not just some concept, but something we promise to live. What if our lives aren't just circumstance coping, but blessings we've come here to give? And what if our lives, shouldn'ts, mustn'ts, and dare nots are not what we've come here to do, but rather to stand on top of our dreaming, content to let faith lead the way, to go beyond logic and reason and scheming, to be here and live what we pray, and then to allow the unfolding to happen, to honor the Spirit's command, to dare to know greater than mind ever dreamed of, to be what we can't understand. That was Pat Rodegast, and that's how she lived her life. And I know she's here. I can feel her. You kids were very lucky to have her as a grandmother. I remember you when you were this big. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. In Emmanuel's words, if death could be seen as a beautiful, clear lake, refreshing and buoyant, then when a consciousness moves towards its exit from a body, there would be a delightful plunge, and it would simply swim away. I'd like to now introduce Kitty Kelly. Kitty is a longtime friend who's been an angel in Pat's life. She has shown up at every step along the way. Kitty?
Hi. I'm going to talk to Pat. I do crazy things like that. Okay. Dear Pat, since, as Emmanuel said through you, there is no such thing as time, space, or separation, I'd like to speak directly to you, my dear friend. He also told me in a reading that we all have two names, one for our limited self and one for our unlimited self. He said, your limited name was Pat, and your unlimited name was Emmanuel. You experienced those aspects of yourself as separate, but I'll speak of them as one, if I may. I'm sure everyone here has a tale of gratitude to tell, and I'm here to express to you my gratitude for your part in making me a heretic. Yep, I'm a heretic, who now holds beliefs that are contrary to established church dogma and go against family and cultural programming. And I admit to feeling a thrill each time Emmanuel would smash one of my clay idols to bits, using no other weapon but words that express loving truth. The thrill came not from rebellion, but from a deep relief and resonance with what was said. It was like some part of me already knew something long ago that was buried and was waiting for the bell of truth to be rung. So what were some of those long accepted beliefs? How about the one that says that to be a good person, you had to sacrifice self for others and must always put others before self? You said I was the center of my life and that everything in it was there to serve me and my journey home. And speaking of home, you said that everyone makes it home. No one is left behind. This I received with mixed feelings since I've been working very hard to get to heaven. And now you tell me that there never was a question. I would have been saved anyway. So you left me with the homework of doing what I do because my heart wants to, not because it ensured my ticket home. That made me one happy heretic indeed. And another core teaching, glad this idol got smashed, was that human nature can't be trusted. And to ensure a place with the angels, you had to overcome your nasty human inclinations and choose God and what God would want. Enter you and Emmanuel saying, there's no choice possible between choosing self or God, for they're one and the same. And even more deliciously unbelievable, that I don't have to sacrifice my will to the will of God, for the will of God is expressed through my heart. That's how love talks to itself. Yikes. Good one. How about the belief that follows upon that one? That it's dangerous to make mistakes and have flaws, for they would tarnish your goodness and make you less pleasing in the sight of God. Heartbreak. And then you come saying there's no such thing as sin. Mistakes are simply learning tools. Sweet relief. And what lovely non-judgmental vocabulary you used. Instead of sin and mistakes and evil, you called it forgetting. And instead of redemption and purification, you called it remembering. I remember very well the first time I heard you in a crowded room telling us to ask ourselves, what have I forgotten? You said that forgetting was inherent in the nature of the human walk. And since we promised we would forget in order to undertake our soul's journey, we've not strayed. We're just keeping our promise. Thank God, I hated being mad at me. The list of old beliefs could go on endlessly, but I would conclude with this special one. The painful belief that one who was blessed to be a messenger, to be in direct touch with God, must be willing to suffer for that privilege. Pat certainly put paid to that. She loved her life. She married several times, that's another no-no. Had children and grandchildren she delighted in. Was loved and welcomed as she traveled the world, ate wonderful food, drank wine, listened to jazz, and spent hours with friends laughing and singing the old songs. She so enjoyed her life. Emmanuel said, when we are in our joy, we're closest to our angelhood. And Pat, your angel self danced unashamedly right in front of us all. Hallelujah. And so, what does this heretic now believe in? I believe in love, and I believe in miracles. And having you in my life for 33 years has been one extended, lovely miracle. I'm beyond grateful. Thank you, my dear friend. I'm not going yet. Val asked if I would read part of a reading that Pat did for me. It was the only time in my experience that she channeled anyone beside Emmanuel. She channeled Jesus. She saw the cross, maybe because he knew he was talking to me. And so this is what Jesus said. I am seen by most everyone as a symbol for suffering, for pain, for rejection, for misuse and misunderstanding, for sacrifice. And though this would not be an error, there's perhaps a different viewpoint that would more readily service the human world at this time. And that is to say that the avenue, the path to resurrection, need not be forged by pain and suffering. That the pain and suffering was indicative of the human condition, but not necessarily a model for it. That at that time, as in this time, those that are in pain are nearer to the truth, not because pain's the doorway to truth, but because pain is the alarm system that awakens the consciousness. But once the consciousness is awakened, dare to have no pain. Do not be afraid to relinquish your own fear that if you're not afraid, something will come that will surprise you and harm you. Do not utilize any longer past experience of what seemed to be calamity in order to intensify the false belief that if one is not watchful, harm will come. This you were taught very early and very deeply. It need no longer be a burden you must carry. The road to resurrection does not always have to be tread with such terror, such caution, and such a negative assurance that unless one walks through the exact same footsteps as my own, that they must therefore be rejected in heaven. The stations of the cross must not be allowed to be misinterpreted as the only way by which a human life can be lived. All right, one more paragraph. To open at any moment to the glory that is there does not render you careless, thoughtless, or unworthy, but rather makes you a greater light to shine forth so that others who believe they must not see will open their eyes and perceive. Now, did you hear who believe they must not see? For there's inherent in a great part of the human world a false belief that says, I must not know what I know, I must not be who I am, I must not feel what I feel. I must not share my greatness, lest somehow I be misunderstood, lest somehow I be found out, lest somehow I be persecuted, crucified, and killed. And though there are many who say they've rejected that consciousness, be very clear with those who claim they no longer believe in suffering. Be very clear that as long as they are suffering, they have not accomplished what they hoped they had. For one's life, one's body, is a witness to the belief system. You're not placing yourself in a position to judge, you're placing yourself in a position to witness to what has obviously been transpiring. And one doesn't say, well, you've done this to yourself, but rather, look at the gift you've given yourself, that you've brought to who you are. At this moment, something wondrous has been offered to you, a place of discomfort, wherein you have stored all of your fearful beliefs. And it's saying to you, look here, now is the time. Now is the opportunity to move to this place, this treasure, this storehouse of information, and allow it to come. For it is no longer necessary to believe that you must suffer to reach the kingdom of heaven. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Kitty. Emmanuel's truth. Godliness cannot be superimposed on humanness. It is humanness. There is no separation. Know yourself, and you will know God. I'd like to now introduce Beverly Sterner. Beverly is a longtime friend, again from Pathwork, and is in the truest sense, has been a great protector of Pat. Beverly?
Well, even though I'm an organizer, I'm not organized. I wrote some notes on the bus coming in. I'm an ad-libber. And I'm going to try to really read some of my notes. But as you all know, life is not quite the same after really meeting Pat and Amanda. And mine was no different. Only my initiation was a little dramatic. I had gone up to the Pathwork Center, it was 1983. I'd never known anything about this. A friend told me, go. There I met Kitty. And we two tall people at the back of the workshop would laugh a lot and tell jokes. And there were some people who could see things and some people who could hear things, and we couldn't hear anything and we couldn't see anything, but we were very funny. The name of the workshop was called Opening Your Channel, and it was given by Barbara Brennan, who is, most of you know, a now very famous healer, and Pat. And my experience at that workshop was hilarious and profound. My channel opened with a whoosh, and I couldn't move. And I, without going into the details, which I'm happy to give you at another time, life changed. And I went back into the city, cleaned up my act. Doors opened for me, as Joseph Campbell will say, when you're lined up and you're following your bliss. The apartment building that I lived in went co-op. I flipped it without a penny, got the money, went up to the country, to the little cabin that I had, and studied the pathwork for many years. And while studying the pathwork, with wonderful, I see many of you here, teachers, and friends. I am an organizer, so I loved Pat, and I loved Emmanuel, and I organized. And when I went down to visit my mother in Florida, I said, let's organize a workshop. And we did. And we did it with Judith Stanton. Judith, who made Emmanuel, who brought Emmanuel into the world like nobody else could or did. The fact that we have an Emmanuel book, the fact that we've had those workshops that were translated into 3 books is because Judith did it. And Judith also was the best person to do workshops with Pat. She was a rock. She did the fabulous meditations. She was clear and crisp and funny. So we had a great time in Florida and then at my house where many people came for many years. And so I dubbed it, having had some experience with public relations, I dubbed it the Annual Emmanuel, which could sound something like a medical procedure, but it wasn't. And so every year we had a marvelous time combining Emmanuel, Pat. We had talent contests, or not contests, we just let it out with song and jokes, and the most favorite thing that Pat loved was floating down the river on a tube, on an air tube. Because my house is on a hill, Beverly's Hill, PR, on the river. And so we would work it out. I'd organize to have tubes on the top of the river. We'd all float down, come down, have marvelous food, sing, and then Emmanuel would come through. So Pat and I became girlfriends, along with Kitty and my friend Mariana, and every time Pat was in town, the girls would go out and listen to jazz and cut up and flirt, and we became good friends. So good, I remember that when my brother died in 2001, my brother who was very close to me, and it was a shock, he wasn't sick. Pat said, "Come to Slovenia." She had some workshops to do in Slovenia, and she said, "Come." And so I came, and we had a great time, and we stopped off and took a train across and stopped in Venice, and where we both talked about our lovers and what made a good lover. And I remember asking her, and she said a couple of things, and then she said, being present. I said, right, being present. After Pat started getting dementia and Alzheimer's, and she knew it. In fact, she said to her boyfriend in Seacrest, "Don't talk to me that way. I have Alzheimer's." And when I asked her, I said, "What do you miss the most here?" And she said, "The illusion of control." And I said, even in Alzheimer's, she understood. And she told me, you know, even here, happiness is a choice. So she knew that too. I think the most important thing that Pat and Emmanuel gave me was faith. Opening me to faith, opening all of us to faith. And so I wrote a poem entitled Faith. I linger a little longer now at places I pushed or brushed my way through. In this space, this solitude, I am brought to the core, where everything is made simple. Sometimes falling down on my knees in agony, crushed, alone, pleading. Sometimes humbled to my knees in awe, in gratitude, praying. After the upheavals, the floods, when the river has receded and the brown mud settles to the bottom, even as it slowly makes its way down, clouding the waters, still the sun shimmers on a river that never ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. That was beautiful. Emmanuel reflects. Every act of kindness and love adds more light and more power to God's truth in your world. To bring the concept of love into your physical reality, to live it as richly as you can, is to answer the calling of God within that has decided to incarnate. I'd now like to introduce Charlotte Hunter. Charlotte is a longtime friend from Pathwork as well, and she and Pat shared a real sisterhood. Charlotte is a true guardian to the purity of the teaching of Emmanuel. Charlotte?
Wow. Okay. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. When Pat walk. When Pat walk. When Pat walk. She send my blues away. Okay, Pat, I tried to put a little gospel in it. That's what we had talked about. In a very small village in Tanzania, there was a young man, and his name is Matthias. He is Dr. Matthias. And it is because of Pat, who was able to help me find a sponsor for this man to become a doctor. And he is now training 60 other medical officers. In another part of Tanzania, there is a young woman, and her name is Verdiana. And she is in her first year of medical school. And it is because of Pat. When I began my nonprofit organization in 2004, everyone else told me how crazy I was. I wasn't qualified. I didn't know what I was doing. These people were not even my family. But Pat stood by me fully cheering me on, supporting me, loving me, giving me wine, taking me out to Italian restaurants, making me laugh, and telling me that all was as it ought to be. I have been with this project now, I'm in my 9th year. We have 2,000 children, which are being loved and cared for. And I thank Pat from the bottom of my heart for her support and her love and her guidance. There will never be another Pat. It's kind of good in a way. But she was my mother, my sister, my colleague, my teacher, and I will miss her deeply. Emmanuel was someone that would enter into my heart and into my soul and into my being, bypassing all the defenses, all of the no's that you had. No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. Don't want to do that. Don't want to do it. And Emmanuel somehow would just come in and sit in the middle. And I would do it. So when I was told the first time that I was going to be going back to Africa, I said, no, I'm not. They ain't got no toilet paper there. And they got no toilets. And I am not a camper. I don't like camping. And I said, when am I going back? He said, as soon as we can get you back there. And I thought, oh. And that was in October 2003. And in February 2nd of 2004, the meal program began in Tanzania for 440 kids and has grown to 2,000 kids. It's miracle upon miracle upon miracle, and I am totally grateful to Pat and Emmanuel for everything. And I want to say to Val and Cliff, Pat loved you very much. Very, very much. And she adored her grandkids. Totally. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Amen. 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 Say it over. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Charlotte. Emmanuel's blessing. By knowing the nature of love, which is the external power of the universe, when it is expressed and sent, love is instantaneously received. I'd now like to introduce Judith Thompson. She is an old friend and co-founder of the Children of War. Pat had enormous respect and love for Judith. Judith? Oh, there you are.
Seems like after that amen, we really are. If you're wrapping this up, you are a hard act to follow, sister. Really, you are. Okay. Hello, dear Pat. Dear Emmanuel. I'm looking at what a gorgeous day is it today, and the sun's shining in here, and it's just so absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect afternoon, and we really feel Pat with us. In 1976, I was at a retreat in Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California with Ron Dass and Stephen Levine and other people on death and dying. And a woman that evening shared some words that were so extraordinary about dying and what dying is. And they moved me deeply, and I went up to that woman, Judith Stanton, afterwards, and I said, "Who was that?" She said, "Oh, well, those were the words of Emmanuel." I said, "Well, how do I meet Emmanuel?" She said, "Well, here's my friend. Her name is Pat Rodegast, gave me her number. I phoned up in 1977. I went and had my first reading with Emmanuel. And one of the things I remember walking into that living room, which was what Fairfield, these hanging plants that hung from the ceiling with leaves and foliage that went all the way down to the rug. They were probably 8 or 9 feet long. I thought these were the most gorgeous, flourishing plants I'd ever seen in my life. I said, there's just got to be this incredible, and I was in the waiting room because Pat was finishing up a reading. And I said, wow, just what a vibe. I mean, and that sense of fertility, of nourishment, of feeling that love was in the air was exactly what I felt when I walked into that little room and sat down for a reading the first time, which changed my life. And thank you, Judith Stanton, for really opening that door for me. In 1980, I began working with survivors of the Cambodian genocide. And it was deep and intense work, and my readings with Pat and Emmanuel guided me every step of the way in opening myself up to holding the deep pain and suffering of these people who had experienced genocide. One of whom was a young man at the time, came to the United States. I met him. He is a remarkable bodhisattva kind of guy who lost everything in the genocide, was forced to witness the brutality, was forced to dig the graves, lost his entire family, and came to the US through a series of circumstances and began to speak about love, and began to speak to the best in every single person he saw, even as he bore witness to this suffering. And he would talk about the common bond of suffering. He inspired me so deeply that I wanted to build an organization around his example. But I didn't have the courage to do that. I was and always have been a wild-eyed idealist. And in Pat, I met someone who was just like me in that regard. And I so appreciate the stories, Cliff and Val, that you told about her, why not? And right at the very get-go, Charlotte, I loved your story too, because the same thing, right at the very get-go, it was, well, why not? Why not? Why not do this? So we built an organization that brought together young people from 22 different war zones. They came together in settings of retreat and did very deep emotional healing work, and then went out on tour to 500 high schools in over 100 cities, meeting with 500,000 young people. We were launched by Archbishop Tutu right after he won the Nobel Peace Prize. We had an amazing 10 years. And Pat was there at every moment, encouraging me, even as we ran out of money. And so I said, Pat, why don't you join my board? Well, this was, when you have a board with the head of the World Council of Churches and other people, they sort of don't quite get it, what Emmanuel was about and what channeling was about. And I was nervous about it. She wasn't nervous about it at all. She said, well, we'll just go in the room. So she would bring in Emmanuel at a board meeting. She would bring in Emmanuel to my staff. She would bring in Emmanuel to the young people, this young man, arm-shorn. And for her, it was like, what's the big deal? Why not? This is a gift that's coming to all of us. And I remember being at a board meeting, And we were all sort of, what are we going to do about the money? And she just stopped and said, let nothing but love guide you. And she said, those children know that they're here to teach nothing but love, and you need to know that you're here to teach nothing but love. And you could hear a pin drop in that room of people who were not used to this kind of wisdom. And it turned us around. I could go on telling you many a story about it, but for me, the remarkable thing of having somebody, as you use the word faith, Beverly, but who herself just stepped into the next place and the next place and the next place without thinking about, should I, can I, does it make sense? And every step of the way she led me in leading that organization, in building that organization into one of the most astoundingly beautiful demonstrations and expressions of love that I have ever, to this day, witnessed, filled with compassion, filled with beauty. And it was really her standing there beside me that allowed it to happen. So, thank you, Pat. And amen again.
Thank you, Judith. Pat's family would like to take the next 15 minutes and open the sharing to all of you. If there's anyone who would like to briefly share a special memory that you have, Pat, let me know and I'll come find you with a microphone. So, is there anybody? Wonderful.
Pat was my helper, my teacher, my neighbor, my friend. What I loved most about Pat was her humanness. Hello. Okay, sorry. What I loved most about Pat was her humanness, that incredible mane of silver hair, the way she carried herself like a dancer when she walked into her room wearing those Capezio pumps she fancied so much. The way she moved her hands when she channeled Emmanuel. I loved looking into those blue eyes. I loved her laugh when something off-color was said. I loved the sound of her voice on the phone. I learned very early on in our sessions together that I could tell Pat anything and everything because she wouldn't remember it anyway. That was before the dementia. It drove me nuts in Emmanuel groups when someone would ask about what a loved one was doing after they passed, and Emmanuel always said, they are turning somersaults. I, for one, can't picture Pat doing that, but I can picture her dancing to her favorite Dean Martin song, a glass of Chianti in one hand, a chocolate biscotti in the other. Patricia, my helper, my teacher, my neighbor, my friend, I know you're dancing.
Thank you all so much. And for those of you who have other stories that you would like to share but just didn't right now, the family would love to have you join them at a brief reception in the back. And I know, Cliff, you'd like to introduce.
I was hesitant on whether to even play what I'm about to play, but I I played it for my youngest kids. I have a lot of kids. And they thought it was cool, and it was a story that I think is really relevant to right now. Those of you who don't know, when my mom used to channel Emmanuel, he did some spontaneous bedtime stories. And at one point, my sister took on a task of making a film about my mom, and thank God she did, because it's this awesome snapshot of where she was at, and she just looks amazing, and she was amazing, and it was such a great experience, and and she and I got to work together, and that was good, almost the whole time. So this is a clip from that film, and it's one of the bedtime stories, but it was read by my mom as a voiceover talent, and she kept trying to get me to hire her, by the way, as a voiceover talent. And she asked all the time. So she got to do it this time, and this is her reading a bedtime story of Emmanuel's, an animated 1980s-ish animation. So give us a break. This is going to take about 12 minutes or so. So just enjoy it and see what it's about, because the lesson that it talks about and what it is exactly what my mom's perspective on life was about, and I think it's very relevant. Enjoy.
Once upon a no time, there was a wonderful spirit named Alice. Now, you beings who have decided in this lifetime to represent your masculine aspect, do not feel slighted. You too were Alice. What's in a name? In this realm where Alice lived, there was no room for fear, no need for pretense, no requirement for definition beyond the delight of the moment. In the Bible, it's called the Garden of Eden. To we in spirit, it's called home. To you, within your human consciousness, it's called, oh, that's ridiculous. Alice was a being of incredible curiosity, not unlike many of you. And through the millennia of exploration moving from now to now, there awakened a curiosity to explore what now was beyond itself. And so plans were made, and advice was both given and received, and there were many farewell parties and much good wishes. And finally the moment came when Alice was to embark upon her adventure of discovery. Now remember, this is a bedtime story. And of course, there is a part of Alice that never left home, that recognized that oneness was really all there was. Alice put on her pair of wings made especially for adventure, and she soared through the heavens until she came to an opening that quite puzzled her. For there, it seemed, the world of familiarity ended, and right before her was a vast opening through which, for a moment, she hesitated to go. For she thought that if she were to move into that other land, she might not remember how to return home. Alice turned back for a last look homeward, and then she leapt with the greatest enthusiasm into the vast unknown. As she drifted through the velvet sky, she said right out loud in the middle of the universe, "Once upon a time." Time? What a wonderful idea! If there is time, there must be a place where I can experience it. For time and place go together, of course. And as she continued to drift, listening to the song of each star, wondering what it was like on that planet or this one, she came upon a very soft and gentle breeze that seemed to pick her up and carry her in the tenderest of care to a place where there was a very shining and beautiful circle of light. This circle of light began to pulsate towards her. She watched with extreme interest as the light seemed to reach out and fade back, and reach out and fade back. And Alice, having been attuned to listening very carefully to the song of flowers and to the melody of rainbows, could hear a faint voice coming from this planet. And as she moved closer and closer to it, she began to hear sounds quite unfamiliar. Sounds of egos clamoring for attention, and a sound which quite confused and upset her, the sound of weeping. She said, "I don't remember that. What does that mean, that strange melody?" When Alice got close enough to see where all these unfamiliar sounds were coming from, she saw beings that were just like herself, except that they were all wearing rather dense and heavy costumes and were apparently unable to see anything of lighter matter, because when she waved, no one waved back. So she decided that she would put aside her wings for a little while and take on a costume herself to join the others. So Alice chose 2 people to be born to, since this was the way to get into a costume. As Alice stood at the doorway of her birth, she saw lots of other spirits waiting for costumes too. She was most surprised and excited to see that the part of herself that she had left at home had come to visit her. And that part said to Alice, "We in the oneness who love you will remember you. We will never leave you. You will not remember us, except in the depths of your being. And oh yes, your wings never rust. They will always fit you regardless of how big you think you've grown." So Alice took off her wings, and with great courage, she was born. The first thing Alice did was to look for pockets in her costume where she could stuff the memory of home. And because her costume seemed to have no pockets at all, she thought, "Very well, then I will tuck it in my heart." And so saying, she turned her attentions to the adventure of the moment. Now, it was not carelessness that caused Alice to forget, nor was it a lack of loving. It was simply that time and space had taken on a new dimension, as it always does when one comes from the remembering and suddenly finds oneself in limited clothing. And so it isn't surprising that she soon found herself not remembering who she was, and looking into the eyes of other people and not being able to see beyond their costumes. Sadly, the more Alice forgot, the more room there was for fear to come in. Alice tried to get away from fear by always being loving and kind to others. But it was of no avail. Fear would not leave her alone. And Alice said, "Whenever I feel afraid, I feel as though I've forgotten something. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I just feel as though something very precious, very sweet and dear has gone from my memory." And just then, Alice heard a whisper, and the curtains blew gently open, and in came an angel of light, the part of Alice that had never left home. Alice recognized her right away and said to her, "I will prove to you that having left the oneness, I have grown. I have accomplished. I'm ready to come home now." And the response was the tenderest of questions. "Alice, will you let us love you?" That is the question that you have traveled through eons to hear and to respond to, only to be reminded, "Dear Alice, that I know who you are, and all I have ever wanted from you is permission to love you." That is the question that is always being asked of you by love wherever it is found, by the kiss of a warm puppy, by the blooming of a flower. And so there was a wonderful magic moment when Alice said, "Yes, I will let you love me. I will put myself clearly on the altar of faith, and I will say to you, and to you, and to the light and the oneness of all, yes, yes, I will." And so saying, the two became one again, and she put on her wings and went home. There have been times since all this began, where I have felt so grateful and so filled when I can step out of just the experiencing of it, where it becomes what I do today, and take an overview. It's astounding. And one of those times I was being open and grateful and full, and I said to the world of spirit, I said, "What do you want me to do? I mean, why is all this here? What do you want me to do?" And I heard Emmanuel clearly say, "You are to teach the gospel of unknowing, the walk of faith. And at that point, I wasn't quite sure what that meant. But now I think that what I am doing in my life is living the gospel of unknowing and walking the walk of faith. And this not knowing where I'm going to live, not knowing what Emmanuel's going to say in a workshop, not knowing anything, and being willing just to die into the next moment of my human experience has become for me my ultimate aim. Because when I am in this moment, when I am in the now, I am full, I am safe, I'm joyous, there's nothing I want. Everything is there. And then when I step out, when fear calls me out from the center, which it does frequently, then I get into all my head trips again about how to be safe, what should I do, I need to know, plan, structure, and all that. But when I'm in the now, I absolutely know this is the only place I'm alive. It's the only place I'm real. So my task in this life is to walk the walk of faith.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do, saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all, and I stood tall, and did it my way. I've loved, I've laughed and cried, I've had my fill, my share of losing, and now, as tears subside, I find it all so amusing to think I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way, oh no, not me. I did it my way. For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who needs. Yes, it was my way.
Please do come back and hang out. Continue sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.